Today I want to talk about dukkha. Now, you may or may not have heard of this term, but you've likely heard of suffering in Buddhism. So suffering was a very loose early translation of the term dukkha in the West. But dukkha means everything from distress, unsatisfactoriness, stress, disease, discomfort, you name it. All these different terms kind of make up what dukkha is. It's a very complicated term if you really think about it that way, but it has to be that, and you're going to learn more about that in this video today. Now, we've latched onto this word suffering, or this translation of dukkha as suffering. You've likely seen it on social media posts, you've probably seen it inside books, for example, because as Westerners, we can understand suffering, and so, okay, I know this term, and that's easy for me to understand compared to dukkha or many other translations of what it actually means. So it sometimes gets, I think, lost in the Buddhist tradition and Buddhist teachings for Westerners that we think that all the Buddha talked about was dukkha or suffering. And it's actually not true. What he actually was really trying to teach was dependent origination. I have another video and information about that. But he was trying to teach that, but it was probably such a complicated and scary thing to really understand, this dependent origination. He kind of shifted a little bit towards dukkha as a way to ease people into it. And I'm going to explain why today. So essentially, you have to really understand that dukkha was and is a central part of Buddhist teachings, but it's not at all. But it really feels like it all. And it also paints this picture of Buddhism as being a very pessimistic type religion, like, oh, you guys are just focused on suffering, all you care about is that. Or even the extremes, like you just want to get rid of everything. When we talk about nirvana, like you just want to blow out, you want to get rid of everything. So this nihilism, and those are the extremes. Buddhism is actually a very optimistic religion and a very loving and if you will, happy religion, because what the Buddha was actually talking about, and this is to make better context when I talk about dukkha, what he was really talking about was getting rid of dukkha in our lives, getting rid of this unsatisfactoriness, this stress, this disease, this discomfort, everything that just makes our life just not really comfortable to be inside. And he had to explain that in different ways. So he's saying, you can get rid of this, and then you can live as you truly should. Happy, true love, true happiness, not these conditioned ones we're talking about. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into this. So the word dukkha, actually, if we kind of break it up, to do means almost like difficult or just not perfect. That's really the first part of it. And then we got ka, which is basically kind of like an axle hole, or if you will, kind of like a wheel. So if you really think about this, I kind of like a few different similes or examples of this. Imagine, even in a Buddhist time, you kind of referred to a potter's wheel. And so if you're trying to make a clay pot, if it's not perfectly round, this potter's wheel, you're probably not going to have a very good product in the end. But what about our modern times? Imagine a wheel on your car. So a wheel on your car looks round, but it's usually not balanced right. So if you ever watch what they actually do, they actually put weights on your car. So there's a little machine there, they weigh it out. So because that wheel's not perfectly round, they got to balance it out, because maybe there's one part that's not as round as the other, for lack of a better term or explanation. So they have to kind of balance it out. So when you actually drive your car, it feels very smooth and it goes down that road nice and perfectly, right? Now, if they didn't do that, you would be a very uncomfortable ride. I've had that before. So they're balancing it out. So we can kind of think about that in the Buddhist tradition. We have the Noble Eightfold Path. I'll talk a little more about this in a second, which really is going to be the opposite of dukkha, which is sukha. So sukha is almost like a perfectly round wheel. And so when we talk about the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path, if we practice all of that, perfectly together, that's a perfectly round wheel. But it's really him showing us the path towards getting rid of dukkha. So we just get rid of it by making our lives perfectly round. And now, when we look at the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, there's going to be some parts in there we're probably very good at. Maybe morality, conduct, maybe meditation. Who knows? Maybe wisdom. We're very good intellectually. But maybe some parts we're not. So we're almost putting like on a car to your vehicle, little weights there. We have to focus more on these other ones to make that perfectly round, to make this smooth ride. So if you look at the road, it could have like potholes and bumps and all that stuff. You want to have a smooth ride as possible. You want your wheel to be able to handle all those bumps in your life. And so that's another part of Buddhism. So I mentioned in the very beginning dependent origination. So that's really what the Buddha was really trying to teach. All things arise and fall due to causes and conditions, for a very simplistic explanation of it. So when we look at one particular thing in particular as it relates to dukkha, we are a result of dependent origination. We are a grouping of things we call the five aggregates, and there's like a process called namarupa that's part of this as well too. So we are just a temporary conditioned phenomena. You and me exist right now. Absolutely, we are both here. We are both these individuals, but we believe we are this permanent, unchanging, independent self. And that's exactly what the Buddha said does not exist. We are ever-changing. We are interconnected with other things. We are not permanent, but we believe we are. And so that's really, if you will, the delusion or ignorance we have. We are ignorant of dependent origination. We can't really understand and see that. So we're caught in the belief that this temporary grouping of things, this idea of self, ego, whatever you want to call it, is permanent in many different ways. For example, from your entire life right now, you believe that, okay, I know I'm growing older, or maybe I've learned something, or I'm changing, or whatever the case might be, but you believe that there's this core central thing in you that never changes. And even your body, it's so hard, sometimes it's so subtle, like when the different parts of your body like replace themselves and stuff like that. You can't see that, so you believe, oh, okay, I'm just this permanent entity, right? And so that is really the delusion we have, and that's creating, in a large part, a lot of dukkha in our lives. It's this belief in this idea of self. What the Buddhist practice is all about us breaking down, and that may sound a little scary, but we're trying to get to the core thing here. We're trying to break down this idea of self because it causes dukkha, among other things. There's both internal and external dukkha, and there's many nuances, terms, and explanations with dukkha, so I'm not going to get all into that in this video. But like, internal, like anger, beliefs, what you feel, all these different things. And then you have like external, like maybe what happens to you, everything from like birth to death, or when you get sick, there's different things, what other people do to you. So this belief in self is what's causing really a lot of this dukkha, because you want to cling and crave to attachments to reinforce this belief in self, which doesn't really exist. And when I talk about self, remember, I'm talking about our belief that we have a permanent and unchanging and an independent self. That is what we believe we have, in many different nuanced ways, but that's what we believe we have. And so when we're clinging and craving and grasping and all these attachments to reinforce that belief, and that's everything, even to other phenomena and to other people and other things, we're clinging and craving to that. That is really the delusion here, which is creating all this dukkha, and it arises things in us such as greed, anger, and delusion, which are the three poisons or three fires. So that's a good segue right there. I like to explain those and really what the Buddha was trying to do. So the Buddha is really considered like the great physician or the great doctor. And if you really think about like his Four Noble Truths, that's exactly what he was doing. So obviously not like a medical doctor, but a doctor of dukkha, if you will, or dependent origination. So in the Four Noble Truths, he talked about essentially effect and cause, and effect and cause. So the effect right now, the first noble truth was, our existence has dukkha inside it. And you're like, if we relate that to the medical side of things, you are sick. Oh, okay. So that's really why he started off with like dukkha. It's like, you know what? You're sick. You may not even realize you're sick, but you're sick right now. Different levels of sickness, like you maybe experience this dukkha at a much higher level than somebody else, but we are all sick. We are all sick patients right now. We just don't see that. We're so delusional, almost like glasses that are dirty or whatever the case might be. We just can't see the true reason why we're sick, or even that we're sick. So, all right, so we got our diagnosis from Dr. Buddha that we are sick. Well, Dr. Buddha, that's the effect. So like, well, what caused that? Well, he's basically saying we are sick because we are constantly clinging and craving to things. And I talked about that just a second ago. And we are just delusional about this. We have this ignorance about the true cause of that. And so when we cling and craving to attachments to reinforce this belief in self, that's creating the dukkha in our lives. So I'm going to relate this to the three fire, three poisons here in a second. So, okay, so you told me why I'm sick. well, what's my prognosis? And so Dr. Buddha, this is why Buddhism is a very optimistic religion. He said 100% cure rate. 100%. You can absolutely be cured. Absolutely. And so there's no one can, this disease does not have to continue. You can be healed. Absolutely. And so that result of that healing, that cure, if you will, is called nirvana. So it's our state where we're no longer affected by dukkha. We're awakened and enlightened. We can actually see and understand at a very fundamental level dependent origination, which really just breaks down this fake wall, this dirty glasses, whatever you want to call it, of what we're perceiving. And now that we can actually see things, well, I'm not going to be creating these causes and conditions. We're not going to be creating these things, these attachments, these clinging craving that has been reinforcing and continuing this disease of dukkha. So we reside in a state of nirvana, which is basically, if you want to think about it this way, cured. You are cured. You're healed. You are in your natural state. Think about like when you have a sickness or a disease, like you have maybe the flu or whatever else, right? Now, you don't feel really well, right? But you want to get better, and your body's helping you get better. Maybe take some medicine, and then when you're feeling better, you're like, oh, this is great. I feel a lot better than I did then. So really relate that sickness to dukkha. And then when you're feeling better, well, remember how you felt better? That is essentially nirvana. But it's this particular mental state and everything else that we're talking about was nirvana. All right, well, cure. Well, I want to be cured. How do I actually do that? So the Buddha writes this prescription and has the Noble Eightfold Path. 3 parts there. Remember I talked about the wheel, right? That's helping us get to that cure. So as laypersons, that can be very overwhelming. You're like, well, maybe I'm not really good at this part, or I'm always kind of faltering here, but I'm really good here. Well, that's all part of Buddhist practice. We are constantly practicing Buddhism in our everyday life to make our wheel perfectly round. Will it be for laypersons? Perfectly round. And perfectly round essentially means nirvana, for lack of a better term or explanation, where we've been awakened and enlightened, and we get to that perfectly round wheel. Well, probably not, but we are constantly creating the conditions that are making it smoother, making it more round, more and more and more. And we can feel those, and we can see those effects, if you will, as we start to do that. So maybe we're no longer affected how we were before. Remember that the internal and external dukkha. So maybe we're no longer affected by that anymore. That's beneficial. Maybe not by all these different types of dukkha, but maybe by a few things we're starting to understand. No longer letting things affect us in that way, because we're understanding these Buddhist concepts and terms, and we're able to actually exist a little bit better in our world. Now, well, I believe my goal should be to become awakened and enlightened. Yeah, I think that would be great. I think everyone would want to actually achieve that as well. But if you really look at the Buddha's past lifetimes, remember every single past lifetime in this cycle of rebirth. And this is what dukkha is constantly making us do, because we are clinging and craving to things. It's dragging us down. It's keeping us in this cycle of rebirth. But we don't actually exist permanently and independently and unchanging, right? So our karma is what continues on. And we have all these, if you will, different existences, right? We are not the same person between each one, but we are casually connected by that karma that's continuing on. So in the Buddha's lifetimes, he was an unenlightened bodhisattva many, many times, and we see a lot of morality and conduct in those past life tales, which really help us as Buddhists understand everything. But all that accumulated into that final lifetime as Siddhartha Gautama, where it helped him become an awakened and enlightened being, become the Buddha. And so without all that effort, after all those lifetimes and existences, he wasn't able to achieve it. So sometimes, you know what, it's not about us right now. We can absolutely benefit from the Buddhist path and understanding everything and practicing, but it's going to be continuing on. It's going to benefit somebody else. Absolutely. And even right now, watching this video, you're interested in Buddhism, casually in the past probably happened because one of these prior existences and that casual time frame of that karma, right? There was wholesome karma being generated. Somebody was interested in Buddhism, or these different things that kind of like led you here in maybe the most nuanced way, but you're now benefiting from it. So you're benefiting from something in the past, and you can go ahead and help benefit somebody else in the future. So, or existences or beings or whatever it might be. So when we're looking at dukkha, it can be very much I don't want to say a very pessimistic, look at Buddhism, because we're like, well, you know, I'm used to my life right now, and that's really the delusion and the ignorance. We're so caught up in what we believe is okay. And that's a great example, is the three fires and three poisons. Gave you an example of the Buddha's a doctor, right? The three fires, three poisons are greed, anger, and delusion. So imagine there's poison or fires are different ways to explain it. So imagine with poisons. Would you want to be ingesting poison and feeling sick all the time and not feeling great? Sometimes you might be okay. Maybe your body's handling that poison all right. You're not the best, but okay. So that's kind of how we are in our lives. Like, okay, you know, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Or the fires, like, would you want to be on fire? No, but like sometimes that fire's not raging as strongly as we think, but maybe we're getting smoke inhalation, or maybe it singes us a little bit. So if all of this is unsatisfactory, we consider poisons or fires as your analogy for the greed, anger, delusion. It is not the best way to be. And it's a very good explanation or example to give in Buddhism, kind of like a story. Imagine like a house is on fire. Would you want to be inside that house? And so we actually had a story where, you know, father tried to lure his children out of this burning house because they couldn't understand the house was on fire. So he had to like say, hey, I got your toys out here and stuff like that. And he got them out, basically, if you will, awakening them to the truth of things to get into the state of nirvana. And that's kind of like us. We are so used to that fire, that poison, we don't really understand that that's causing us a lot of dukkha in our lives. And again, that's all related because we do not understand dependent origination. We do not understand that this dukkha is really a result of many different things, including our belief in the five aggregates making us a permanent, unchanging, independent self. So when we do that, we cling and crave these things, and this cycle of rebirth just continues. And so the Buddha is saying, I can save you guys, basically. It's on your own effort, but I can show you the way to actually achieve this. And he did. We had many of the Buddha's followers became awakened, enlightened individuals. And so we have the teachings, and we have throughout history, we see this. You can see people achieving different levels of attainment when it comes to this. Now, does that mean that all these, especially when it comes to monastics, like they're all awakened and enlightened and reside in nirvana? No, but they got to extremely high levels, right? And so when they did that, that level of dukkha, man, it went down to almost like negligible levels, but it was still there. So they were still caught in the cycle of rebirth as a result. They were still, to some maybe nuanced level, clinging and craving at things, even though it may not have been like for you or me, like how we cling and crave as laypersons. But they got to that level. So maybe the next existence, they can achieve that. So when it comes to dukkha, it can, and we can use that term suffering, really for ease of translation, but really understand that it's a very nuanced and many different terminologies when it comes to dukkha, but it's not all the Buddha taught. And so it may take a lot of focus and attention as new Buddhists and Westerners, especially like with karma and meditation. We look at dukkha or suffering as another thing we understand with Buddhism. But the Buddha wasn't saying that, you know what, your life is a suffering, it's just going to be suffering forever. Forget it, you can practice this Buddhism, but it's just going to be suffering. He's like, no, you can be cured, and we can get rid of this, and we get rid of that greed, anger, delusion. That's when we've been awakened and enlightened to the true nature of things. That fire, that poison, we're not ingesting it much, and we're not being on fire as much, probably getting out of the house. We are able to exist as we truly should be in our natural state of nirvana. That's where we want to be, and that's a peaceful state. And a lot of times when we think about, I didn't mention this before, but you're like, what about love? What about affection? And all these other things, right? A lot of times when we look at like love and everything else, it's really due to our beliefs about that. It's not like true love, and that may sound very, very negative. Like, well, wait a minute, I absolutely love my family and everybody else, right? We're not saying that you don't, but there's lots of different attachments and conditions we put to that, right? And so that might be at a very subtle level, maybe a very nuanced level. And we're not saying that you do or do not, but there's conditions to that. And we never realize those conditions. And so what true love in Buddhism is without all these conditions and attachments that are related to it. And that's why a lot of times in Buddhism you see like words a lot with, like, for example, meditation or loving kindness meditation, where it's like all sentient beings. It's like it just goes beyond just what we may think of in our layperson lives. Like, well, I absolutely love this person. It goes beyond it. Like, how can I just like love one person, like very conditional, very attachment related? you just start expanding, like, I see this true love. So that does not mean that you cannot love somebody right now or have affection for somebody. Absolutely not. As laypersons, we can absolutely do that. But as we progress, and it could be in future existences, it becomes much broader. And so that's why you see very much, like, for example, in Mahayana Buddhism, that bodhisattvas take a very big role inside there. It's for all sentient beings that they're actually trying to help achieve awakening and enlightenment. Because dukkha is this poison, this fire that they want to get rid of for us to help us as well. So do you have any questions or comments or just your interpretation of dukkha inside Buddhism? I'd like to hear from you in the comments below. And please make sure that you check out my article for a little bit more detail about dukkha. Thank you.